Welcome to Steelers Saturday Sit Down. Told you guys that we'd be doing this as a live stream after week one. Big shout out to Pat Fryermuth for joining me last week. If you want to go back and watch or listen to that, you of course can. A lot of that conversation hasn't aged. We spent a little bit of time obviously talking about the team's week one matchup against Atlanta, but a lot of conversation about his contract, what he wants to do in this offense going into the future, what his season goals are, stuff like that. But this is more so the format that I'm looking forward to this show being throughout the season. So I'm Zachary Smith, of course, joining me, my co-host of Around the 412, Tyler Weeks. How we doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. I woke up in beautiful Santaquin, Utah this morning. If any of you tune in on YouTube to our normal Around the 412 show, you'll notice a different background. I'm currently in Utah, about to drive over to Wyoming, Laramie, Wyoming, more specifically, for the BYU-Wyoming game. If deep cut, I am a BYU fan, if you also know that. But I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about this game. I'm feeling good about the Steelers right now. I think that after week one, not just the defensive performance, but certain things we saw offensively, it left a lot to be excited about for the Steelers and this season as a whole. And yeah, go check out that Pat Fryermuth interview, little deep cut as well. That was before the announcement was even done. So we have hashtag sources for the actual contract that he was getting, which is pretty cool. But yeah, go check out that Pat Fryermuth interview. A lot of long-term stuff, season-long conversation, not a ton of stuff about the Falcons, so it isn't outdated like Smitty said. So go check that out from last week's Steelers Saturday Sit Down. So how are we feeling about this Broncos game? How are you feeling about? Well, for one, I just want to start here. We had this discussion on Around the 412, but it sounds like Justin Fields is going to get his second consecutive start.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that is actually not even the noteworthy lineup decision that is happening at this point because of the tactical stuff that's going on. But sticking with that real quick, also be sure to comment in the live chat, get involved in conversation. I know we see Noah in here already. We see John in here already. Appreciate you guys tapping in with us. But I also want to preface before we dive too far into this. If you guys do watch or listen to the Around the 412 Steelers show, you'll notice that we're not going to spend much time, if at all, talking about the upcoming game because we are going to be doing this on Saturdays. So that was all kind of just recapping what happened in Atlanta and like bigger picture stuff. These are going to be for previewing whatever this week's game is. So diving into the Denver conversation, it is going to be Justin Fields. I mean, Tomlin listed him as questionable, Russell Wilson, that is, but said in terms of, him actually starting this football game, he wouldn't even list it as questionable. So it's going to be Justin Fields for a second straight week. If you want to consider, Jerry Dulac put out there that Justin Fields is going to start week 3 already even, which is interesting to me that they would already put that out. I mean, we have no idea what Justin's going to look like in week 2. Obviously, we've talked about the exciting things that he can bring to the offense, and hopefully they kind of just continue to develop that chemistry going forward. And I'm not saying Justin could play well enough in this game to make us feel like we should just stick with him. But certainly I think that the door is open for either possibility to still happen at this point. But yeah, Justin Fields for a second straight week. I mentioned one thing in there is also Jersey Jerry in here. How we doing, Jerry? It's up. And Kevin in here as well. I think we'll score more touchdowns in the red zone using the read option. Yeah, I mean, and that's something else, obviously, the element of Justin's legs that he would bring to the table, a different dynamic to the offense. We talked about that a little bit on this week's Around the 412 Steelers show, the difference in how the offense could look with both quarterbacks. But the tackle situation, I was the one that put this out. I know Wex got I think Jim Wexell was the first one to actually kind of allude to this because Troy Fautanu confirmed to him that he had taken most of the reps at right tackle with Dan Moore coming back to practice after he missed a day. And I thought that was really interesting. So I texted the person that told me last year about Broderick getting into the lineup against Tennessee when he first became a starter at right tackle and was like, hey, do you think Dan Moore Jr. and Troy Fautanu are about to be the starters on Sunday? They sent me back a one-word text that just said yes. So go into practice yesterday. It's again Dan Moore Jr., Troy Fautanu working as the starting tackles. What do we make of this? Because it looks like Broderick is going to be out of the lineup. Now, I will say, I put this out there yesterday that it's not like a typical benching, if you will. We know he's dealing with the elbow thing. And I don't know how many people have discussed this, know about this. I have enough information on it to feel comfortable. It's a hyperextended elbow. So, and that's not something. So he's just got to get comfortable using that brace. Don't know if it will require surgery down the line or what exactly that looks like. Former Steelers offensive lineman that I had a conversation with that had a similar injury said they didn't feel right until the offseason. Like they played through it. It was painful to do so, but they were able to play through it. And then they didn't really feel right until the offseason. On top of that, he's now also dealing with a right thumb injury. So he's not getting that same punch that you need right off the snap. So I think that Broderick just has a couple different things that he's dealing with now. So I'm not looking at it as like just a performance-based thing here where they're like Troy Fautanu is the better option. I think they want to get Broderick right. I think they want to kind of reset with him and get him ready on the left side to be able to take over at some point, because ideally they want Broderick on the left, Troy Fautanu on the right. As much as like the plan has kind of been confusing with what they're doing there, that's ultimately where they want to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the uproar that you're going to see from Steeler fans that are whenever the lineup is announced and you see Dan Moore Jr. still at left tackle with Troy Fautanu at right tackle, the uproar I don't think is going to have anything to do with Fautanu. Everybody's going to love that. Everybody's going to be excited that he's making his first round pick for this past year. It's going to like another Broderick Jones situation. The sooner that he was going to get in, the sooner the fans were going to be happy. What I think the uproar is going to be is people are just going to look at Dan Moore Jr. being in there, not really look at what Broderick Jones is dealing with health-wise, and that won't factor it into their mind. At least that's my opinion. I think that they'll probably just look at the fact that Dan Moore Jr. is playing over Broderick Jones, and that is going to be an issue for them. But at this point right now, you can definitely say that it is more likely that Dan Moore Jr. is going to go out there and have a successful day than I would think Broderick Jones.
Against Atlanta, by the way.
He was really good in Atlanta. I don't think that Dan Moore Jr. gets enough credit sometimes just because other people want to see the other two guys out there. But I think that he was really good at Atlanta. I think that with the health stuff that Broderick Jones is dealing with, and also not just the health stuff, but he is practically going to have another rookie season if he makes the transition to left tackle. And so do you want to do that while he's also dealing with these injuries? I don't think that's a smart move. I think it's smart to deal with Dan Moore Jr. out there right now, get Broderick healthy, and then make that transition at some point this season. But I just don't think that you need to throw him into the fire. Like, obviously, he's going to take his lumps even when he's fully healthy at left tackle. I don't think that you need to add insult to injury, quite literally, if he's also dealing with injuries as well.
Yeah, John said, I get why they had to do Broderick at right tackle because of the injuries, but how we got here still has been frustrating. Hopefully they keep him at left tackle going forward. The thing with Broderick to me, right, like they drafted him, he had primarily played right tackle. People talk about him being a natural left tackle. He actually had more reps at right tackle than left tackle leading up to when the Steelers selected him. I necessarily didn't care which side it was on that he was going to play, and I understand wanting the position flexibility. But for me, when you have a guy that's as raw and pass pro as he was, we've talked about that. Me, you, we had DB on here. We were all kind of in the same boat. Like, this is a guy that you're not drafting for his first season. Maybe you start to see it in his second season. Hopefully by year 3, you're looking at a more polished player, but we knew he was very raw in that respect. That's why I don't think it's right to kind of have him go in this direction or directionless when he's not, comfortable enough at one spot, good enough at one spot. I don't have an issue with him being flexible, but when he's somebody that's so raw and has so much improvement to do in that regard, that's why I think I take an issue with kind of the path that they've taken here. So I agree. And I think that Troy feels good on the right side. And I think Broderick is honestly, as weird as this is, because Broderick is the better, or of the two that he brings to the table, I would say he's better at run blocking than pass blocking. That's my opinion, but I feel like that's closer to a fact than opinion. Troy Fautanu, I think he's really good at both, but I think he's the better pass protector. You would think that it would be the other way around then. Like Troy would be the left tackle, Broderick would be the right tackle naturally, just based off that, because that's typically how it goes. I don't have an issue with what they do, but again, it's just about getting the most reps from these guys in the spots that they're going to be in. So I think that that's the way that we're looking at, though. I think it should be Troy on the right side, Broderick at left tackle eventually. Kevin has an interesting position here. This is great. DMJ is playing well, boosting his trade stock. I believe once Brody is fully healthy, he'll take over, and DMJ will fetch us a great wide receiver too. Could Dan Moore Jr. be used as trade bait this year around the trade deadline if they are still in the wide receiver market, which I expect them to be? The one thing that I would kind of, I don't know about pushback. I think it's an interesting point. I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but I think based off that we've already seen so many like tackle issues this year health-wise, like three of the top 4 tackles have already dealt with something, and it's week 2 of the season. Like before we got into the season, we had 3 of our top 4 tackles dealing with something. Are they going to trade the one guy that I know that he missed a day of practice with an ankle thing, but largely has been healthy for them so far, and they know that they can plug in there? Like I almost feel like they would keep him around for depth, let him walk in the offseason. I still think that's the most likely path that we have here. If they feel like Broderick is fully ready to go, if they trust Dylan Cook as the third guy, I think that there's a path to it. But if you're asking me for a prediction here, I think that Dan Moore Jr. isn't traded and just walks in free agency.
I agree with that. I think that you look at the depth of the position right now, you can't really trust that everyone's going to stay healthy, especially if you're trading Dan Moore Jr. at that point. Now, don't get me wrong. I would love the idea because I would love to see another wide receiver too in here, but especially after looking at last week too, and then looking at how it's just George Pickens and a bunch of fans. But I think that it wouldn't be wise, in my opinion, for the Steelers to do that because you know how finicky health issues could be. You've already seen it so early this season. I don't think that it would be wise for the Steelers to depart from somebody that you know can start. It's not somebody that you're questioning whether you want them even in the starting lineup on any given Sunday. I don't know. Some fans might have that mentality, but I think that having someone like Dan Moore Jr., if Broderick Jones does take over that left tackle, you know that if something happens with Broderick or if something happens with Troy, they can slide Broderick back over and bring Dan Moore Jr. back in. I just think that having that as an option is wiser for the Steelers this season. So as far as predictions goes, I would say the same thing. I don't think it's happened, but I would be intrigued by it in just the idea of that trade itself. I'm curious like what wide receiver they would be able to get with that, but just don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, depending on health, we might be seeing the team that would make sense as a trade partner right now in the Denver Broncos, because we talked a lot about Cortland Sutton. Garrett Bowles, their left tackle, has been banged up already this year. He's dealing with a calf injury, and as Steelers fans, we've heard calf injury a ton to open up this season, so very familiar with the way that those things can go and linger. He's going to play on Sunday, Garrett Bowles is, but we're going to dive into that. Actually, let's just do it right now, because we haven't talked a ton about this game, just obviously who's going to be at quarterback and who's going to be the tackles. Are there any matchups immediately that you're circling on this, like this is where the Steelers have an advantage, or you're just intrigued to watch? What are you kind of looking forward to in this one?
Well, the first thing is you're getting a chance at a rookie quarterback. I think that you look at what Bo Nix did last week. He wasn't terrible, but he wasn't good either. I think that seeing what we saw from the Steelers defense, there's an opportunity to really take advantage of a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience in the NFL, a questionable offensive line. I think that the Steelers defense, specifically that defensive line, should eat up tomorrow. I think that taking advantage of that defensive line, offensive line, and getting to that rookie quarterback, I think it should look pretty similar to what it did like with Kirk Cousins, except most of the sacks should count tomorrow. At least I hope they do. And I think that not necessarily specific matchups as far as personnel goes, but Kenneth Walker had a day last week. He ran for over 100 yards. I'm curious to see what the snap counts are going to look like between Najee and Jaylen Warren in week 2. Obviously, Jaylen Warren dealing with the lingering injury, so he only touched the ball, I think, like 3 or 4 times last week. I would expect that to increase over the next few weeks, but I want to see one of these running backs take off for a game. I know I mentioned in this week's episode, I love the ferocity that Najee was running with, but I think there's an opportunity to have a 100-yard rusher. That doesn't happen all the time with the Steelers, especially looking back at last season. I really hope that they take advantage of that because Kenneth Walker had a day. I think Najee Harris could have a day if that was the case. But it's going to take also what is Jaylen Warren's snap count going to look like? How are they going to monitor his injury coming back from it? And is it going to increase?
Yeah, I think they're going to be careful with it, especially when you have another back like Najee. I mean, I think Jaylen, you'll just see a gradual ramp up. I was surprised to only see him get 4 touches last week. I would assume he goes over that this week. But that's a good shout. I mean, the Seahawks did have their way more so on the ground than they did through the air. I mean, Geno Smith had a 35-yard touchdown run in this game. I think that they're probably looking at Justin Fields and saying, we can't let that happen again. I think you'll see more of a QB spy in this one from Denver. PS2 versus George Pickens, man, that's where I go immediately. Like that's a popcorn type matchup for me. Number one receiver in my opinion versus the number one corner in the NFL in my opinion. I'm excited for that matchup, and I'll flip it around to that same position group. Joey Porter Jr. versus Courtland Sutton is another one, kind of in the same vein because of the way that the body types match up there. Like Joey's going to travel, I think, sometimes with receivers. We saw him pretty much match up with Drake London, and I think that was more so stylistically, like body type, as opposed to just, I don't think Joey's going to travel all the time. But this is another matchup where it's like Courtland Sutton. I like Josh Reynolds as a player, but there's not much else in that room. Like, I think this is a matchup where it makes sense for Joey to see a ton of Courtland Sutton for sure. So I'm excited about those matchups on both sides. And because of that, I just put out a tweet about this shortly before we came on here. Denver last year gave up the most receiving yards and the most touchdowns to tight ends last year. I know I'm biased. I think this could be a Pat Freiermuth week. I put it out there. I think, we kind of like 4 receptions on 4 targets for 27 yards last week. This is a guy that we expect to kind of pop off in Arthur Smith's offense. I think this is the start of when we start to see that take place.
I like that. I mean, I had a lot of high praise for Pat coming into the year. I think that there's a good opportunity for that this week. And I want to go back to what I was touching on as far as matchup goes. One specific matchup that I'll say, just because I didn't know his name, but now I do. Mike McGlinchey versus TJ Watt.
Yeah.
Looking at what TJ Watt did.
Came over from San Fran, Mike McGlinchey. Yeah.
Looking at what TJ Watt did last week in Atlanta, I just feel like Mike McGlinchey has to be sweating so bad right now, knowing that he has to cover him the entire game because our outside linebackers don't switch sides. He gets him the entire game.
Well, they can't. I mean, they put McGarry on an island. Like Caleb McGarry is a good offensive tackle in this league. Not a great, but he's a good offensive tackle in this league. But they put him on an island against TJ Watt. Very rarely were they chipping him with a tight end or a running back. I don't think Denver's going to make that same mistake. That's why I think, like, to me, this screams Alex Highsmith week. Garrett Bowles, like I said, has kind of been limited through practice because of that calf injury. I think he's kind of the guy on the other side of TJ Watt that's going to pop off. My bold prediction for the week on Steelers Afternoon Drive, we always give bold predictions on Friday, was it's going to be a big week for the Pats. I think Pat Freiermuth catches 2 touchdowns. I think Patrick Queen gets a turnover. There was a lot of talk last week about Queen not having that much. Like, he's a guy that we expect to bring splash to the defense. He was kind of quiet in week 1. It was Dante Jackson, Deshaun Elliott getting the turnovers. Obviously, TJ Watt, very impactful. Pretty quiet week for Patrick Queen. I think that changes this week.
Yeah, I think that we didn't see a ton from Patrick Queen. Solid game still, but it just didn't see a ton of the flash that people are expecting. But I think that could be a good shout. The defense as a whole, and we mentioned it last week, this could be the best defense in the NFL. This could be the best. I mean, at least top 3, top 5. But we touched on it on this week's episode where at every facet of the game, as far as defensive line, middle linebackers, secondary, this is the best defense, at least through 1 week. I should throw that in there. At every single level that we've had since at least 2010. And I know that's a big praise to compare it to like 2010, but you look at every single defense since then, I don't think any of them touched this one.
2019 probably didn't have the off-ball linebackers, but that secondary was so gross. Like, they were 4 deep at corner. Like, when they would go into dime and have Joe Hayden, Steven Nelson, Mike Hilton, and Cam Sutton all on the field together, like, that's disgusting. Obviously, the edge rushers that they had at the time as well. But, I mean, I agree. And think about the additions that they could have throughout the year. They just brought Terrell Edmonds back. Say what you will about him as a player, but he's a fine, strong safety, and he's a backup now. Like, he's going to play special teams, and he's going to be the backup strong safety to Deshaun Elliott, maybe get some snaps in the box and stuff like that. But he's not even going to have the same role here. Like, not so for people that were like, not a fan of his, it's not like he's going to jump right back in and have the same role that he had here anyway. You get Cam Sutton back post bye week before you play a divisional game. That's going to be huge for the secondary. And then, Cole Holcomb, I think at some point you're going to get back. I know there's a lot of like it's been pretty murky. I will definitely admit that. But from people that I've talked to, they're steadfast on this. They think they're getting him back. They're confident that he's coming back at some point this year. Heck, it might be before Cam Sutton returns to this team. I asked Alan about him yesterday, and he said, yeah, he's been there. He's actually started running like full speed yesterday. So, that's another step, obviously, in the right direction for Cole. So, like, this is a defense that's not even complete right now with everything that's going to be at their disposal. And I know injuries can take place, but you can't really predict those. So, injury aside, man, this just feels like it's a top 3 to 5. And Allen thinks he's very bullish, maybe even one defense in the entire NFL.
Yeah, I want to take a hard turn because I want to bring up this. Score a touchdown, hopefully. What, in your opinion, do you think, or would you like to see from the Steelers offensively to show that they improve from week 1 to week 2? Obviously, scoring a touchdown would be nice, but outside of just scoring one touchdown, like, what do you want to see from an overall offensive perspective?
Well, I understand, and I don't think it's a bad, thing coaching wise to put Justin in the best position to succeed, especially being that he was kind of on short notice, the starter, to not target the middle of the field because of what Atlanta has at safety and Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons. Those guys are game wreckers. You obviously want to avoid them at all costs. And so I can appreciate that if that was the intention. I don't think it should be this week. Like, Denver doesn't have those dudes. I think that their best players are honestly along the defensive front, then obviously PS2. So I think this is a week to target the middle of the field. That's why I gave Pat Freiermuth the shout that I did. I think there's going to be a lot of underneath stuff. I think you should see 2 running backs on the field quite a bit. I would use both, assuming that Jaylen Warren is healthier. At the same time, like, pony formation, maybe lining Jaylen up in the slot, motion him in, even keep him in the slot and have him run some routes out there. I think that you can get creative and you can beat this team on the perimeter and in the middle of the field in a way that you couldn't attack Atlanta. I don't think they have the same speed on defense that Atlanta does. I don't think they have the same dudes on the back end minus PS2 that Atlanta does. So I think that this is a team that is much more vulnerable in those spots. I think the biggest concern for me is the pass rush. I don't think enough people talk about Jonathan Cooper, who had the most pressures in the or had best pressure rate last week of anybody in the NFL that had at least 10 pass rush snaps. Baron Browning is a good player. Nick Bonito is a good player. Zach Allen is a good player. I think that those guys are the guys that I'm a little bit concerned about. But I think, like I said, middle of the field, attacking the perimeter. I think that those are the ways to beat this Denver team. I think that's, you got to avoid PS2 and you got to avoid that defensive line any way possible.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is going to have their work cut out for him this week. And going to be interesting to see if Troy Fautanu is indeed starting, which it sounds all accounts he is, how that is going to be in his first start, handling that.
They played better than I expected against, the likes of Matthew Judon and Grady Jarrett.
For sure.
So, like, if they were up for that task, I'm not saying that this is like, that I think this is a tougher task. I'm just saying, if you look at the entirety of Denver defense, that's where, if I'm placing concern, that it is.
Yeah, for sure. And the only difference between week 1 to week 2 is going to be Troy Fautanu making his first start. Going to see what that looks like as a rookie. But I think that also the offense is going to get a bump just from the fact that they know going into it that they're preparing for Justin Fields to be the starter. That didn't happen with week 1. They were preparing for Russell Wilson. Justin Fields gets thrown in as the starter a couple days before the game. You're not going to have time to really overhaul your offensive scheme going into a game in that short of span. This week, you have the entire time to prepare for Justin. I think that they do mention, or that they do change it up. I think that the read option that got mentioned earlier, I think that could be utilized a lot because of Justin's legs. I just think that the offense overall is going to look different from week 1 to week 2 because week 1 was Russell Wilson's offense with Justin Fields operating it. Week 2 is going to be Justin Fields type of offense with Justin Fields operating it. Is it going to be better? I don't know, but I think it just from a fundamental standpoint, the actual scheme they're going for is going to look different because you prepare differently for these 2 quarterbacks.
This is somebody that I feel like is kind of in the same boat as we were when we were talking about last game. Lack of TDs aside and few missed throws, I thought the execution of the Steelers offense between the 20s was pretty damn good. It may be because we've seen the worst the last few years, but I digress. I can appreciate the fact that this guy saw only 18 points scored, no touchdowns, just 6 field goals. But also saw the fact they only had 1 3 and out, had the 4th most time of possession in the entire NFL last week, and said that he still sees positive signs, because I said that a lot of people I think are going to lump that offensive performance in with the Steelers offenses that we've seen for the last half decade which have been underwhelming, obviously, and say nothing has changed despite the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks changing. And I don't think that that's the case. I think that this team is certainly on the right track offensively. I don't think that they're ever going to be a team that, explodes and all of a sudden is averaging 27 points per game or anything like that. But I think with Arthur Smith at the helm, with the pieces that they have, they are in a place where they can dominate time of possession, let their defense do their thing. Obviously, just don't turn the football over, but do it more efficiently than they have in the last few years. And then every once in a while, take advantage of the play action, make some splash plays down the field, and be explosive in that regard, which they haven't been able to do in the last few years. So I like this from Kevin. I'm kind of in the same boat. I do think, just morally for themselves, they got to find the end zone a couple times this week. Yeah. They don't want to keep not being able to finish drives. I know that that's been an emphasis in that locker room as well. They were encouraged by what they did last week, but the understanding that they got to find a way to get 6 instead of 3. So I think that they're heading in the right direction. Hopefully this week it kind of comes to fruition.
Yeah, I definitely think there's been change. I mean, even look, I saw it on Twitter this week, the comparisons from route trees for George Pickens from game to game last season to this season. You actually see him using the field more, going down the field. Everything was 10 yards and in. It felt like on Matt Canada's route tree with him, which is outrageous for the type of player George Pickens is. You actually saw him utilizing down the field more. I think that's going to come over time with Arthur Smith. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect from week 1, but I do think it was better than expected in week 1, considering the circumstances that they were thrown into. It's a transition. New offensive coordinator. It's going to take a little bit of time. And as this continues, there's going to be new things implemented. Like we said, Troy Fautanu in week 1 or week 2 is going to get his first start at right tackle. What's he going to look like in his first start? There's going to be things every week going into this that are going to be headlines for the offense, and it's going to be change for the offense. I just don't think it's time to hit the panic button after week 1, considering I think that overall the performance, while they didn't score a touchdown, I don't think it was lackluster either. I thought they did a lot of good things.
Here's where I'm not hitting the panic button, but I'm pretty close, because it's not like it was just 1 week. We had this issue or this fear coming into the season as well, all off season. The wide receiver 2 spot. And not just from a receiving standpoint, but the run blocking too. This is why, to me, this week is a huge week for Van Jefferson. I don't know about internally how they feel, but he's on my own personal hot seat because he doesn't play special teams. If he's not going to be much of a threat as a receiver, you got to be able to run block, and he doesn't. So right now, even though he's wide receiver 2, the de facto one in this offense, I'd argue that he's the least valuable wide receiver on this team because he doesn't provide anything else. And he's not providing in that regard right now either. So I think this is a huge week for him. Ben Skowronek, they just elevated him again. We know he's going to get a helmet for this game, obviously to play special teams. But I'll be honest, with what we know that he can at least do as a blocker, I would play him over Van Jefferson if he doesn't show something this week. Or I'd just play more tight ends. Only have George on the field then, if nobody else is going to be able to contribute in that regard, because understand, I trust them, the tight ends, to win their blocking matchups against linebackers more than I do the wide receivers against defensive backs right now. The reason that the Steelers were successful running the ball inside but couldn't do anything on the perimeter, their wide receivers were atrocious in run blocking. Even in pass block, the 1 yard catch that Van Jefferson had was because Calvin Austin and George Pickens got blown up on that play and didn't get their blocks. So that's a regard that I'm really going to be focusing in on this week. They got to be way better in terms of their run blocking at the position. And that's kind of what we talked about. From a receiving standpoint, yes, the wide receiver position is a bit minimized within Arthur Smith's offense, but it's still a very important job because of what they asked those guys to do as run blockers. So to me, Van Jefferson is a guy that's certainly on the hot seat this week. Roman Wilson might dress for this game, but I don't expect to have a huge role. I still think you're looking at another week. Didn't fully practice for most of the week. He did the walkthrough on Friday without any limitations, but that's nothing. He's got to be, in my opinion, next week, if he has a full practice on Wednesday. Wednesday's the big day. If you can go fully on Wednesday, you're probably pretty good, unless you have an injury afterwards. I don't expect Roman Wilson to be a huge part of the game plan, even if he gets a helmet on Sunday. So going to be a big test for me for what these guys can do in that regard.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect to see Roman Wilson. And speaking of last week, the wide receiver blocking was pitiful. It was awful. That play specifically, where it was the 1 yard game because Calvin Austin and George Pickens got blown up, specifically Calvin Austin. I had that tweet that This is Calvin Austin trying to block and is a little kid doing basically like an Oklahoma drill and just gets absolutely leveled.
Yeah.
And Van Jefferson, terrible at blocking. And I think you're right. If you don't play special teams, you don't block, and all you're doing is catching the football, but you don't even do that, then what are we doing here?
Tyler, right now, they're dressing 3 receivers just to play special teams. Skowronek, Scotty Miller, and Calvin Austin because he's the punt returner. Like, you can't – these guys got to figure out different ways to contribute. And then the one that doesn't play special teams can't block and had 1 reception for 1 yard last week. This is a huge problem to me. I mean, John,
you know where this problem stems? You know where this problem stems?
Yeah.
It stems from Omar Khan putting all of his chips into Brandon Ayuk, and it didn't work out.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like Brandon Johnson, who's on the practice squad right now, I thought he maybe deserved an elevation this week, not just because he's got some familiarity with the Broncos and could be a bit of a revenge game. He's 6'2", 200+ pounds. Like, I feel like he would at least be a better blocker on the outside than what we've seen, and he might be a better receiver. He had 19 receptions last year, but he turned 4 of those into touchdowns. I thought he had some intriguing moments on tape, and I know that the familiarity was mostly with Russell Wilson, obviously. Also Zach Azani, who he has his wide receivers coach. Don't know how much he knows the playbook, but man, again, just from a run blocking perspective, I don't think they can do worse than what they had out there last week. John saying here about Nick saying he expects Roman to be out this week. Feels like another week away from having any role. Yeah, certainly the second part I am 100% on board with. Not doubt Nick, if he thinks Roman's going to be out this week, he probably is. But yeah, even if he gets a helmet, I don't think you see much of a role from him. By the way, 3,100 people in here right now. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We appreciate you guys tapping in as we wrap up here. Tyler, the last thing I want to do, we do this on afternoon drive. We're doing it on around the 4-2 before we start doing the Saturday morning show. We need a prediction, not only score-wise, but also if you have any bold ones for what happens in this game.
Well, I don't know if my score prediction could get any wilder than what the actual score was last week, 18-10. I don't think anybody ever would have expected that. As far as score, I do think the Steelers win this game. I think the Steelers defense is too good. Unless this offense absolutely shoots themselves in the foot, which they didn't do last week. That's another underrated part of the offense that I don't think a lot of people were talking about, is that Justin Fields didn't turn over the ball. He didn't throw an interception. That's something that I think is honestly at times more important than blowing up the stat sheet. Just doing enough to be able to put yourselves in a good situation to win. I do think the Steelers are going to win. I think the defense is too formidable. I think that it is going to be a big week for this front defensive line. I like your shout as well of Alex Highsmith having a big day with the focus more so put on TJ this week. At least you would think Denver is preparing to do that based off of his performance last week. Who knows? And it might not matter. TJ still might get through.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I will say I'll give a score prediction of, I'll say they find the end zone. I think they find the end zone a couple times. So I'll say 20-10. Very round score, very even score. But I think that the Steelers are going to find the end zone a couple times, kick a couple more field goals. And I think that the Steelers defense is going to continue their dominance, hold another team to 10 points. And then what was the other one? Bold prediction?
Yeah, like if you have like a player prop or something that you think is maybe a bit out there.
I'm going to say Pat Freiermuth over 6 catches or over 5.5 catches. So.
Okay, I like that. I kind of put mine out there already, so I'm trying to think if I have something else that I feel like is maybe a bit out there. How about Allen's prediction was Justin Fields accounts for 3 touchdowns this week?
Okay.
The conversation, if that happens, like we're saying the door is left open right now for Justin to end up being the starting quarterback going forward for this team, not just until Russell Wilson's healthy. If he counts for 3 touchdowns this week, I think we're going to be having a different conversation.
Yeah. So, also, another thing that I should have talked about or thought of whenever I was thinking about the run game and what the Steelers rushing attack could do against Denver. I was only talking about Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. I wasn't even accounting for Justin Fields. Preparing for Justin Fields to start this game, if the offense is going to be more schemed for him, they're definitely going to utilize his legs more. And I think that while that may take away from, as far as like a box score, that may take away from what Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are able to do as far as rushing totals, I think that when you look at the overall attack, I think that the rushing attack for the Steelers could have a really good week this week.
All right, I have so my score prediction is 26-13 Steelers. It sounds wild to think that they're going to give up more points to the Broncos than the Falcons, but I think that we could be looking at basically the same performance. We're still going to see the same level of dominance. I think Bo Nix can maybe make a few more plays with his legs. Actually, I don't think that. I know that. We saw how Kirk was moving around back there. Bo Nix, decent mobility for a quarterback. He can make some plays with his legs for sure. I think Patrick Queen, for the most part, this is the kind of thing he's here to do, is neutralize that QB mobility. And when you have players at all three levels like the Steelers do, it allows you to pay more attention to a QB mobility, do a QB spy, things like that. But yeah, I'll say 26-13 as far as the final score. Here's another bold prediction that I have. Steelers fans get upset because Cordero Patterson has a rushing touchdown, not Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren.
That would be an interesting one. And considering the rushing attack that you do have between Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, or even Justin Fields just doing it on a keeper, if Cordero Patterson is the one that does get a touchdown, I will applaud you next week on our episode because I feel like that is so bold. That is unlikely. I'll say another one, player prop. I think Dante Jackson get his second interception on the year.
Wow, 2 in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
we got people already saying we're the winners of the Dante Jackson, Deontay Johnson trade because he got 1 interception and Deontay had like 2 catches for 15 yards or something like that in his Panthers debut. I mean, if he gets a second in 2 weeks.
Well, I feel like he's going to be underestimated by a lot of teams just because they don't want to throw to the side of Joey Porter Jr. as much. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe they do attack Joey Porter Jr. more, but I feel like Joey Porter Jr. is going to get more respect this year as far as like attacking his side of the field. I think that Dante Jackson could be the beneficiary of that and make some plays on the ball. I think that he's going to, especially against a rookie quarterback. Rookie quarterbacks are going to make mistakes. They're going to try to throw in the windows that they could in college that they can't in the NFL.
Yeah, you figure he'll probably see a lot of Josh Reynolds. Devon Vell's out for this game. I think he's the only Bronco that is. So Josh Reynolds, maybe Troy Franklin gets more action. Bo Nix's college teammate. Probably Josh Reynolds primarily, though. Kevin says, I'm predicting 30-13 Steelers defense score a touchdown. I like that. CA3 anytime TD. Fields over 0.5. So you think Fields scores a rushing touchdown? Oh, what is this from Boston trying to leave on a bad taste in your mouth?
Wyoming 6-3 over BYU would be outrageous. I mean, I'd be thrilled that BYU held them to 6 points, but man, Wyoming is quite literally one of the worst teams in football. I'm not saying college football, high school football, college football, all of it. They are legitimately
D2, FCS.
Teams. According to ESPN's FPI, they are ranked 143rd. So they have FCS teams ahead of them.
Yeah, Josh
BYU's
Allen
week 1 matchup, Southern Illinois, has a better FPI score than Wyoming does.
That's wild. All right, well, this has been Steelers Saturday SitDAHN. This is the first one that we've done as a live stream. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate all the comments, everybody tapping in. Before we get out of here, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, tell a friend to tell a friend. Of course, hit us up on all of our socials at Around the 412. We'll be live tweeting during the game tomorrow, of course. That's it. For Tyler, for Smitty, this has been Steelers Saturday SitDAHN. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.